Hello and welcome to the 8th Urban Social Forum, an open and inclusive space where we imagine, create, and affirm the spirit of another city is possible. My name is Namira, representing Kota-kota and the Secretariat of Urban Social Forum. Before starting, I'd like to remind everyone that if you're more comfortable joining this discussion in Bahasa Indonesia, you can click the interpretation button below and choose Indonesian. In this discussion, as you may have seen from the video before this, we will be using a website called Menti to compile all the questions that you might have throughout the session. This link will be open from start to finish, and the link will be put in the Zoom chat box. The same Menti link will also be used for the polling session that we will start soon. We are now on the third day of the International Mini Forum. On the first day, we discussed Right to the City agenda and how it can be manifested to democratize urban spaces today. Yesterday, we talked about healthy cities and how citizens' health has often been overlooked in urban discourses, even in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, the topic is an inclusive city. Inclusivity might have become a common term today, yet for years, rapid development of urban settlements has mostly focused on physical urban development. A lack of meaningful inclusivity in policies and infrastructure have often left those with disabilities, women, children, and the urban poor out of the discussion, particularly during the pandemic. Many who faced barriers to their mobility and unequal access within our societies now find themselves even more isolated and challenged. In an inclusive city, every person, regardless of their differences, is considered a citizen and granted equal access to participate in urban spaces. If that is the case, what about the people? How can we have a more inclusive approach to children, the elderly, those with disabilities, and the poor in the middle of a global health crisis, infrastructure changes, and gentrified spaces? How can we better adopt a right-based approach to ensure inclusivity in our cities? In this session, we'll reflect the state of inclusivity in our cities, who has the right to be included in cities, and what it means to become an inclusive city. We are joined by a list of impressive speakers with years of experience in promoting urban inclusivity. To warm up our discussion, we invite everyone to use your gadgets and open Menti for a quick polling. The Secretariat can now please share the Menti. Thank you. So the first question would be, in 1 to 3 words, what does an inclusive city mean to you? You can whip up your gadget and start answering. And as we're waiting for the answers to come in, let me hand the floor over to our moderator today, Mr. Aaron Situmorang, sorry. You might know him as the research coordinator in the social systems team, Pulse Lab Jakarta. Mr. Aaron, how are you tonight?
I'm good, Namira. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Namira. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are. My name is Aaron Situmorang from Pulse Lab Jakarta. So as Namira mentioned earlier, so this session will reflect on the state of inclusivity in our cities, who has the right to be included in cities, and what it means to become an inclusive city. So we have 4 wonderful speakers with us this evening. I'll start by introducing Lily Song. Lily is an assistant professor of race and social justice in the built environment at School of Architecture, Northeastern University. Her work focuses on infrastructure-based mobilization, experiments that center the experience and insights of frontline communities and organizers as basis for reparative planning and design in American cities and other decolonizing contexts. While the second speaker is Anna Siprikova. Anna is a program manager at NACTO GDCI, where she works on the Street for Kids program and is an author of the award-winning Designing Streets for Kids guide. She is an urban planner by day, mother by night, and a tireless public space observer in between. Prior to joining NATO, Anna worked at Project for Public Spaces in New York, where she contributed to Southwest Airlines Hearts and the community program to improve underutilized public spaces throughout the United States. Our third speaker is Nina Asterina. Nina is the program manager for urban inclusivity initiatives at kota-kota with a robust research experience for urban and policy issues. She loves to engage in community planning, urban research, and virtual collaboration. She works on participatory planning and budgeting and urban community of practice. Last but not least, Bu Purwanti, or known by many as Bu Ipung, is the head of advocacy and network at Sigap Indonesia, a disability advocacy organization in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. As a paralegal, her work in Sigap involves leading the organization with their legal advocacy work, providing legal assistance to persons with disabilities when confronted with legal issues, and ensuring that they can overcome the barriers to access to justice. So the session is, as we mentioned before, is how can we achieve a more inclusive city? So let's start by from the first speaker, Lily Song. So Lily, what do you mean when we talk about urban inclusivity?
Thank you. Could I share my screen, please, as I speak?
Sure. Yeah.
Excellent. Can everybody see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm so happy to take part in the 8th Urban Social Forum with everyone here. It's currently just past 7:30 a.m. in Boston, where I'm zooming in from the occupied land of the Wampanoag and Massachusetts people. As we enter this thematic discussion on an inclusive city, I want to honor the continued efforts of the Native and Indigenous communities and the community leaders who work to preserve the history and culture of the tribes in this region. I also want to acknowledge the migrant, racialized, and working class people who have joined them despite 4 years of division and co-optation by economic and political elites in seeking more healthy and humane ways of living together on the land. Now, let's jump right into the question. What do we mean when we talk about urban inclusivity? So I share this picture of the vessel. It's an iconic piece of star architecture from New York City, but we know that every place has their version of the vessel, yes? And I do this to set the context of our conversation. So what is this? This interactive artwork built by the British designer Thomas Heatherwick is the $200 million centerpiece of the $25 billion Hudson Yards redevelopment project on Manhattan's West Side. It boasts 100 luxurious shops and restaurants. What does this do? Well, the so-called Stairway to Nowhere has 16 stories, 150 flights of stairs, 2,500 steps, and 80 landings. During the 4 years it was open to the public, it was widely used for selfie pictures and sadly also for a series of suicides. Before it was closed down earlier this summer, the owner and operator were repeatedly sued for lacking accessibility for wheelchair users. Also, suggestions from neighboring residents to add nets and barriers to prevent suicides were ignored, and that was for design reasons. So why do I share this? To clarify what we do not mean when we talk about urban inclusivity. We don't want inclusion in this sort of urbanism, where much of the built environment and urban life is commodified, multi-species extinction is imminent, and so many people feel anxious and depressed. Seems like my slide is stuck. Okay. The celebrated scholar and social commentator Manning Marable wrote, "Underdevelopment is not the absence of development. It is the inevitable product of an oppressed population's integration into the world market economy and political system." Why should urban inclusivity be limited to accessing prevailing modes of urban development that lock people in degrading and oppressive terms? Let's continue to think more openly and ambitiously about what rights to the city and equal access, enjoyment, and participation entail, beyond consumptive life and business as usual. You may be familiar with this just transition framework adopted by the Climate Justice Alliance, which grew out of the labor and environmental justice movements rooted in low-income communities of color in the United States. This is a set of affirmative principles, processes, and practices of building economic and political power to shift from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. And it's one I find quite inspiring for this conversation. It entails actively divesting, so on the left side, divesting from the extractive economy based on a consumerist and colonial mindset, extraction of non-renewable resources, labor exploitation, enclosure of wealth and power, and militarism. And on the right side, we can see that it also includes collective investment in regenerative economies based on caring and sacredness mindsets, resource regeneration, cooperative work, ecological and social well-being, and deep democracy. It's exciting to think about the urban corollary of the regenerative economy. And in shifting to regenerative urban development, what intentions can we set about inclusionary processes? Ones that center, seems like I'm stuck again. Ones that center the needs and aspirations of citizens who are most excluded and vulnerable in current extractive modes of development. So those situated at the margins, for example, are working class youth, elders, disabled, caregivers, migrant workers, transgender people, and at least in the US context, often bring particular insights on urban environments and infrastructure systems, including their biases and dysfunctions that are often invisible to dominant groups who are blinded by their comfort. These systemic insights, so the view on the system, can fuel transformative spatial imaginaries and possibilities, particularly when those perspectives inform urban agendas, including policy, planning, design, and development. So I'll share an example from a design action research seminar that I've taught called Co-Design Field Lab. This past spring, 2021, the class partnered with someone named Unica Roger-Sip, who is an incredible design activist, artist, and community developer. The Destination Design School, the DDSAE, which she co-founded, is based in the Black Belt region in the southern United States. It's the seat of the historic plantation economy, and where many African-American communities remain today. And using a care and healing-based approach to design that centers youth and their families, they build on the region's rich ecological, cultural, and social assets to promote creative community development based on food, farming, and hospitality. So as a class, what we were doing was developing database narratives and future histories, making a case for catalytic government policies and infrastructure investments that begin to atone for centuries of profound injustices and amplify the incredible community-driven and movement-based work that's already happening in the Black Belt region. So pictured here is the entire class. Unica's there in the middle with the yellow. And this class included youth who are ages 9 to 18 from the region, some of their family members, and graduate students in urban planning, landscape architecture, and design studies, along with course teaching assistants, mentors, and guest presenters. They were split, They were split into 5 teams. Each included a mix of the youth and family members with different grad students from the disciplines. And each team, there were 5 teams, focused on transformative infrastructure possibilities for the Black Belt region. And I have to say, in terms of soft infrastructure, it was important to meet everyone where they are. We drafted community agreements to build mutual trust and understanding through interactive workshops. And we co-created outputs through team brainstorms and coordination. And we also took time as a class to study the infrastructures of regional activism and social movements, in addition to harder sort of infrastructure planning and design aspects. So this is the infrastructural vision from the mobility and access team, which is it's in the format of a poster. They wanted it to be easy and fun to read for people of different ages and from different walks of life. And here you can see with the first vignette that leisure and recreation is a right. So 12-year-old Isis, who was a member of this team, came up with this idea based on her family's experience that all people should be able to travel regardless of whether they can afford it or not, and visit their families and home regions. And her teammates included an artist who's from the region, along with 2 graduate students. And they helped her flesh out this idea, complete with government travel vouchers and a high-speed rail network. And if you read closely with the other stories too, you can see that regional mobility services here are provided through electrical vehicle sharing and driver cooperatives. Neighborhood ambassadors and bike repair scouts help people get around actively and safely. And libraries loan everything from books to building and farming tools, digital tablets, and musical instruments. So for those who are interested in seeing more of the future histories, I'll drop a link in the chat after this, but my time is almost up. So let me reflect on the implications for urban inclusivity. I was really struck by how the blended teams really leaned into the experience and vision of young people from the region, along with traditions of anti-racist, environmental, and labor activism. And the result of that seemed pretty bold. These Black Belt youth are integral parts of multi-generational families and communities that already practice mutual care and sharing. They haven't benefited from the dominant extractive economy, so they have little desire to maintain it. And nor do the graduate students on their teams, because many of them came of age during the global financial crisis, and they're just horrified by escalating climate change. So when given the space and support to do so, these emerging urban planners and designers, and I do include all of the team members, they envision more sustainable, convivial, and equitable infrastructural and development pathways. And it's, these worlds that they created are so far apart from that stairway to nowhere that we saw earlier. And so this is the sort of future I want to be included in. And there are so many others, who are marginalized in our societies and the extractive economy who could unlock such needed changes in the world. And so that brings me to my concluding thought that perhaps urban inclusivity is the open and transformative possibility of the city that emerges through deeply democratic, interrogative, and reparative processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. That's a wonderful presentation. So I think I find it very insightful, especially you underline that the marginalized groups have different views and experience and should be taken into account in designing cities. But also at the same time, you need to create trust in order for them to participate. And thank you also for answering the questions on what is urban inclusivity. So, next we'll go to the next speaker. Anna. So Anna, what are the components and values of inclusive infrastructures?
Thank you so much for having me here, and thank you, Lily, for setting the stage for this conversation as well. I'll just jump right into answering that question. But first, I want to introduce myself. My name is Anna Ciprico. I'm the program manager for the Streets for Kids program at NACTO GDCI. And for those who don't know what NACTO GDCI is, we're a North American nonprofit that's an association of city transportation officials. And part of our work is to produce urban design guidance, and we don't do this in isolation in just our offices, but we do it with cities and kind of helping cities themselves to generate the examples. And our latest guide, Designing Streets for Kids, really focuses on how can we change our cities and make them inclusive for children, caregivers, for everyone else who cares for them. And basically, why do we focus on children? Why do we kind of use that approach to bring inclusivity to city streets? Nearly 1/3 of the urban population worldwide lives in cities, and 1/3 of them are children. And the rest of 2/3, in some way, either directly full-time or part-time actually spend time caring for children. So it really affects everyone. But if you think about the urban planning process, it's very rare when children's voices are taken into account. And specifically during the pandemic, we had all these policies, all new guidance, and there was no discussion about how can we include kids' voices, what they need, how can we meet their needs in this new changing world. So it's still a big issue. And unfortunately, most of the times in most of the cities around the world, our city streets look like this. They're unsafe, they're challenging to walk around, they're challenging to use. They're really designed for a very small specific group that uses cars, goes to work. And again, a lot of times it kind of includes only one kind of specific demographic, specific genders in the planning process. And this leads to traffic crashes being the #1 cause of death for children from age 5 to 29. And it's very upsetting that these numbers are not really shared every day in the newspapers. And we kind of become complacent with this when most of these deaths are preventable. And it's not only death, it's also including all the disabilities, all the limited economic and educational opportunities that children suffer who get into these crashes or get injured, whether they're driven inside the car or if they're walking or cycling or rolling on the streets. So it's not just about making, our streets comfortable for children. We really need to kind of holistically think about it so that kids are not just surviving in our cities, but that they are thriving and they're developing, they can really use their whole potential. And there are some proven design strategies to do that I'm gonna quickly talk about. I know I have very limited time. So first, meeting the basic needs, just making sure that there is sidewalk space that's continuous, that's comfortable, that there are marked crossings, that there are ramps, that all the basic infrastructure is in place. Second, and very important strategy is focusing on speed and reducing the speed limit. Speed is the biggest factor in fatalities. And some cities around the world, recently Paris announced that all of their streets will be at 30 kilometers per hour, which is kind of at the border of this safe speed. And once it increases, the chance of death increases exponentially. And all of this data comes for adults, but it's even more important for children who are smaller, more vulnerable, have less body weight to even kind of, if you compare them to these giant cars that are super heavy and are getting only bigger and bigger, unfortunately. And just enforcing the speed through signs or policing is not enough. For example, if you look at this street, it kind of invites the drivers to speed, even if they don't want to. It's kind of it's wide. There are no barriers. You can drive as fast as you want. Basically, nothing is going to stop you or prompt you that you should kind of reconsider what you're doing. And if we put this speed sign, well, maybe some of them will slow down, but we're all human beings. Our behavior is very complex. So what we really need to do is kind of see how we can shift and redo the physical environment that then tell us how to behave. So on this street, when you have a protected cycle lane, when you have a separate bus lane or transit lane, and then you have space for cars, you really limit the number of seconds that children and caregivers spend on the roadbed. And therefore you're making it really much more safer for them to cross. And it just kind of promotes this behavior. And also it's just impossible to enforce and put police everywhere, and it also has all other challenges when you do so. So changing the physical design is key, and ideally it has to be done in a capital way with capital construction, but it can also be done kind of faster and quicker and cheaper using paint, using some temporary structures, for example, this project in Fortaleza, where the street was repainted and became much safer for all vulnerable road users. This next strategy is reclaiming and reallocating more space for people. Our space in the cities are limited, and streets are our biggest, basically asset in terms of public space. So how can we really make them comfortable? How we can prioritize some other decisions. For example, this is how it was done in Albania, in Tirana, where the very car-dominated, very centrally located square was basically given back to people. And you can compare and see like how much more use and activity it's getting now. There's a place to run freely, to walk around, and it's just like if you calculate the square meters per usable space for the benefits, this has a dramatic impact on every citizen. The other strategy, which is really important, is like not to forget about fun and play. And play doesn't mean something just kind of, some people associate play with kind of like you're doing nothing. It's like kind of a lazy leisure activity, but actually for children, play is learning. It's very extremely important, especially for younger children, to develop their skills, their cognitive development, their physical development. Play for children is the way they learn about the world. So adding more play in more places in the city, kind of spreading it, not only the dedicated playgrounds, but incorporating it everywhere. And as an adult, we also like to play sometime, and it improves our mood, and it's just kind of a good way to be more social, maybe to talk to some of the people you might not talk otherwise. And kind of adding all the tactile elements, like this example in South Korea, when they added sand, water, grass, different stones, really kind of covering all sensory experiences for kids. And you can see there's a lot of fun being in that street. And another strategy is kind of thinking about the street space is not the way it's being governed, because we have the transportation departments that take care about the roadbeds, sidewalks, but citizens and children and caregivers and everyone else, we don't experience the street the way it's governed. We experience it holistically. We include the facades, the buildings. We don't really separate it. So really thinking about the facades, the building walls, like the so-called roof, right? Like what's in the air? Like, is it there trees, shade? Considering the ground surfaces in the planning process and in design process is very important, not just focusing on one piece of infrastructure, but really thinking about it holistically, breaking the silos and collaborating with different departments. Like in this case, in a temporary project in São Paulo, where basically the street, like ground surface almost blends into the vertical surface and creates this vibrant and interesting experience. Thank you so much. Happy to answer the questions and give it back to you, Aaron.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for sharing several examples and principles that contribute to the inclusive city, and especially how we can access this infrastructure through the kids and caregivers perspective. So before we move to the next speaker, I would like to remind people that you can vote on Menti and also ask questions, maybe through chat box. And after the presenter, the last presenter, we will ask those questions. So, okay, next is Nina. Nina, so how does data come into play when building an inclusive city?
Thank you, Aaron. Wait, I'm gonna share my screen first. Sorry if you hear the background sound. It was prior time in my time zone. So thank you, Aaron. And then also that was interesting stories from Anna and then also from Lily. So I'd like to address the questions of how data does come into play in building the inclusive cities. So we're gonna see my screen. Sorry. So at first we're gonna ask the questions, like why does data matters? And then you can see all these articles that I pull up here in the slides. There is a mismatched data, inconsistencies, hinder coffees, and then seniors is for children. So when we are talking about data, we can see there is a lack of data on disabilities particularly, and it was presents a real threat for them, especially in times of crisis. Also, like during the disasters management issues, and then it hinders their access to the basic services and then also facilities in the city. Like imagine in this COVID situation for sure, when you want to get the vaccines and then you are not being documented in the government data, so you are feeling, uneasy and comfortable, doesn't really feel good. It's because you are not being documented by the government. And then, yeah, for sure, there is, nobody wants to left behind in these cases. And the next one is, I'm going to share to you that how does data really matters. You can see there's a good intentions here in the pictures from the city government that they are providing this ramp, also guiding blocks, and then the public transportations. But when they are trying to make a good effort to make the city inclusive, more inclusive for persons with disability, let's say, they don't consider it. It's only for the fulfillment of the, a universal design standard. But then how does people use this guiding block that hits the trees? And then there is no ramp that's steep enough, to get around this, these ramp issues. And then these persons, couldn't get to the public transportation just because the platform's cases is not connected to the bus platform. So the data is really important. And that's why kota-kotas, for example, as in, I guess my case. The participatory data collections, we're trying to making the invisible visible, because when we talk about data, isn't only about the numbers, but when we talk about data, it's also about the connectivity. It's about the accessibility of persons with disabilities, of children, of elderlies. And then in 2019, kota-kota and UNESCO start doing participatory data collections in the city of Banjarmasin. We documented and updating the data and informations of persons with disabilities living in the city, and it sums up to around 2,897 persons with disabilities, which is almost double from the Department of Social Affairs data. And then it's about the number because, when we talk about this data, we try to visualize that, and then we finally connected this data with the general elections commissions in Banjarmasin, and then finally we determined the final number of the persons with disabilities as the eligible voters, and then it helps increase 3 times the official government data before. And then for the reasons, connection to what data has been accommodating these needs of the persons with disabilities, we help to deliver the relief aid to persons with disabilities in the cities during the early days of COVID, and then also the flooding issues in Banjarmasin in early years of 2021. So when we are talking about this data, it's not only about them, or it's not only about their data, it's going to be us, it's going to be our data, because some days we might feel sick and then, getting these disabilities or getting difficulties. And then, somebody's getting older, somebody's getting sick, somebody's getting accident. It means all the data is not only about them, it might be about us. So that's why making the invisible visible is really accommodating their needs in the making more inclusive cities. And then, for example, how this data we connect to more accessibility in the cities. Like Anna said, that children's, there is a rise issues that children are being forgotten of their needs. For example, in this data we collected, only 39% are going to schools. And that's why, and one of the reasons is because they are lacking access to schools, because that's too far away from their home. And then there is a safety issues regarding to get to schools and then coming back from their home. So that's why during our participatory approach in our 2-meet process, we accommodate these kids' voices, we don't underestimate the kids' voices just because they are not, not adult enough, or they are not might having long years enough to live. But, we are seeing the perspective of the children in the city making, because they are also citizens in the city. And these children with disabilities are far left behind than those children. And during the sessions, we accommodate these children's voices through arts, also through drawings, and then also through everything that's interesting for them, because sometimes the experiences, the challenges couldn't be written in simple notes, we should see beyond that data, because, For example, they want these safe school zones in their areas because they don't want to get hit by cars or motorcycles circling around the schools. And then after we facilitating this co-design making process with the children and then with the students from the elementary schools and then also junior high schools, we bring these ideas to the city government, you know, like to get attention for them and also to open up their mind that the children also has voices to as their right to have access to schools. And then here is the example of the before pictures and then the after our co-design process in the schools area. So we accommodate their entertainment, you know, like issues like Anna says, is also we accommodate about the safe issues for them. So right now is being developed there in the cities, but due to COVID, the children haven't really, you know, like enjoy these situations, but hopes that COVID situation get better and then they can enjoy their schools. And then the next one, when we talk about data and when we talk about the citizen participation, it's not only about communities, it's also about children and then also elderly and then persons with disabilities. And the AT user, more often the time, they are not being involved in the community event. For example, like 10% of disabilities has participated, but how about the 90% of the rest of persons with disabilities living in Banjarmasin? They never get involved in this kind of communications, public dialogues, or even community event. And because they are the first timers, that might be, you know, like it's hard to voice out their mind at first. So kota-kota try to bridge their idea, their aspiration, their challenges that they might face by using pictures, by using arts, by discussing. So you can see this elderly and then also AT users and persons with disabilities has raised their hands using votings and in discussions using mural paintings. So it was possible to ask them about their opinion to making more, you know, like inclusive city, because if not if it's not for them, if it's not about them, who else going to talk about this? So we should involve them because, you know, like no one should left behind. And then there is nothing about us, you know, like it's only about that. And then the last one, kota-kota is also addressing the issues about the mobility issues of the persons with disabilities in the city. So when we talk about the number, it was quite high. So there is like 45% of persons with disabilities never left their home. In this COVID situation, we might reflect there is a restrictions to go everywhere. In it feels, you know, like suffocating for us. It's really frustrated not being able to go to somewhere close, like a supermarket, you know, like to schools, to workplace. It's really frustrating enough for us. And then imagine there persons with disabilities, half of them living in their home and they never get out, you know, like to anywhere. So addressing these issues, kota-kota is also bridging this multi-stakeholders dialogues and then also implementing this co-design for three-wheelers for persons with disabilities. We try to enable to have the mobility independently in the cities. And then amongst our participants, so we invite these 10 persons with disabilities to ride their three-wheelers by themselves. And then all of them say that it was really amazing to be able to move by themselves, to be able to get this mobility. You know, it's not only about dream, it's not only about imagination, it's them, it's a real, you know, like they face their challenges. They finally be able to get in contact with somebody else's out there. And then it's really making them capable of thinking of the employment opportunities that they gain through this mobility. So that's why, you know, like while addressing this data, we are trying to accommodate these mobility issues for them. And then we are also applying this mobility campaign, inclusive mobility campaign in Yogyakarta. And then it helps to raise public awareness issues about this mobility for persons with disabilities. And then I'm not sure if the time is enough, but yeah,
one more minute.
One minute. So just closing this one. So reliable and fit to purpose data obtained to participatory methodology leads to tangible positive results. It gives us the stakeholders the evidence they need to advocacy for and make decisions that serve the needs, rights, and aspirations of people with disabilities, children, elderly, and local level. So that's all for me. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you for sharing your presentation. So the importance of data and advocacy, and also I can see like a similarities also between your story and the previous two speakers, Lily and Anna, about participation, especially those who are often not involved in the designing of city through a co-design approach. And it's also a good segue to introduce our next speaker, Bu Ipung. So Bu Ipung will speak in Bahasa. So if you need interpretation as help, you can click the interpretation button on the bottom. Bu Ipung, selamat malam Bu. Jadi melanjutkan pembicaraan dari para pembicara sebelumnya, saya akan menanyakan pertanyaan yang mungkin Ibu Ipung bisa respon melalui presentasinya. Jadi pertanyaannya adalah, apa solusinya? Apa yang bisa dan harus dilakukan untuk membangun kota yang lebih inklusif? Silakan Bu.
Ya, nah pertanyaannya adalah apa yang harus dilakukan untuk membangun kota yang lebih inklusif. Nah, yang pertama kita harus memahami dulu terkait dengan apa itu makna dari kota inklusi. Jadi kota inklusi itu kami maknai sebagai sistem tata kota yang menerapkan pendekatan yang humanis untuk membangun dan mengembangkan sebuah lingkungan perkotaan yang semakin aksesibel dan melibatkan semua orang dengan berbagai perbedaan latar belakang, karakteristik, kemampuan, status, kondisi, etnik, budaya, dan yang lainnya. Kemudian kami juga memaknai bahwa menciptakan lingkungan perkotaan yang aksesibel, menghilangkan hambatan dan menyenangkan, karena setiap warga tanpa terkecuali saling menghargai dan merangkul setiap perbedaan, serta saling bertanggung jawab untuk mengupayakan dan menyediakan kemudahan berupa infrastruktur, bantuan, layanan, dan sarana-prasarana agar masing-masing dapat terpenuhi kebutuhannya, mendapatkan haknya, dan melaksanakan kewajibannya. Jadi sebenarnya kalau terkait dengan menciptakan lingkungan ini, kata aksesibilitas, baik itu aksesibilitas infrastruktur, aksesibilitas layanan, kemudian terkait dengan aksesibilitas sarana dan prasarana, ini merupakan kewajiban yang harus dipenuhi untuk agar warga atau masyarakat rentan dapat menerima atau dapat menikmati haknya. Nah, kemudian apa itu kunci dalam melakukan advokasi terkait dengan aksesibilitas? Yang pertama, membangun kesadaran, baik itu kesadaran terkait dengan hak asasi manusia, tentang masyarakat rentan. Nah, ini masih ada perbedaan pemaknaan tentang masyarakat rentan, bahwa di dalam DUHAM kita mengakui bahwa masyarakat rentan itu ada 5 komponen: perempuan, anak, masyarakat miskin, penyandang disabilitas, LGBT, dan masyarakat adat. Tetapi selama ini yang menjadi poros atau yang menjadi perhatian penuh dalam pembangunan hanya masyarakat miskin, sehingga masyarakat yang rentan yang lain ditinggalkan. Nah, ini salah satu jembatan kita untuk melakukan advokasi terkait dengan masyarakat rentan. Kemudian perspektif disabilitas. Nah, ini sangat penting sekali membangun perspektif disabilitas. Kenapa? Karena selama ini komunitas disabilitas itu menghadapi persoalan dia sebagai ada stigma, mereka juga diperlakukan nomor 2, dianggap tidak penting, dan ada banyak diskriminasi yang dihadapi. Nah, kemudian kebijakan-kebijakan. Nah, ini sangat penting sekali membangun perspektif atau membangun kesadaran terkait dengan kebijakan-kebijakan yang memartabatkan. Nah, ini menjadi hal yang sangat penting. Kunci advokasi yang kedua adalah menyediakan materi, sumber daya manusia, dan contoh-contoh. Nah, ini juga penting. Misalkan apa atau maknanya aksesibilitas, fungsinya apa, gunanya untuk apa, keuntungannya bagaimana, kemudian sumber daya manusianya, aspeknya yang terkait dengan aksesibilitas seperti apa. Kemudian misalkan ruang menjadi tempat konsultasi untuk membangun sebuah bangunan yang aksesibel seperti apa, kayak begitu. Kemudian ada contoh yang selama ini menjadi kunci yang selalu aktor kunci ini, baik aktor kunci untuk melakukan advokasi, aktor kunci yang ada di dalam struktur pengambil kebijakan, baik itu di eksekutif maupun di legislatif, begitu. Kemudian di aktor kunci sebagai pembuat kebijakan, kemudian aktor kunci untuk membangun referral system atau rujukan. Nah, ini sangat penting sekali karena pengalaman kami ketika gerakan advokasi itu dilakukan hanya komunitas penyandang disabilitas, gaungnya tidak kuat. Nah, ketika kita bikin jaringan masyarakat sipil, itu pun juga kurang kuat karena yang melakukan advokasi di dalam struktur pemerintahan tidak ada. Nah, kemudian yang keempat adalah peningkatan kapasitas. Nah, peningkatan kapasitas ini baik di individunya sebagai pelaku advokasi, kemudian juga sebagai aktor pengubah, dia melakukan organizer, dia melakukan community development kayak begitu. Kemudian stakeholdernya. Nah, ini juga perlu ditingkatkan kapasitasnya di dalam memahami aspek-aspek terkait dengan aksesibilitas, terkait dengan HAM, terkait dengan masyarakat rentan, seperti itu. Kemudian ada piloting, percontohan, dan pendampingan. Sampai saat ini kami masih melakukan ini, percontohan untuk membangun lembaga peradilan yang aksesibel. Bagaimana pengadilan aksesibel, bagaimana kepolisian aksesibel, bagaimana kejaksaan juga aksesibel, bagaimana sistem peradilannya, begitu. Kemudian jaringan dan gerakan advokasi, baik di level kebijakan, di level implementasi, dan di level monitoring dan evaluasi. Nah, ini sangat penting sekali, karena kebijakan itu ketika tidak dilakukan pengkawalan, ini akan hilang. Nah, kemudian juga kebijakan ketika tidak dilakukan analisa, telaah, kemudian advokasi di sana, ini harmonisasi antar satu kebijakan dengan yang lainnya juga akan tidak ada, begitu. Jadi sangat penting sekali untuk melakukan advokasi di level kebijakan. Kemudian di level implementasi, bagaimana ini implementasinya, bagaimana monitoring dan evaluasinya, karena kami menghadapi kendala bahwa ketika pembangunan fasilitas umum itu hanya sampai pada perizinan untuk mendirikan sebuah bangunan, sementara mekanisme kontrolnya tidak ada, mekanisme punishment-nya juga tidak ada, begitu. Nah, kemudian yang ketujuh kuncinya adalah terus melakukan kampanye publik, baik kampanye publik terkait dengan aksesibilitas maupun kampanye publik terkait dengan lingkungan yang universal, lingkungan yang bisa aman, nyaman untuk semuanya, begitu. Nah, di dalam melakukan advokasi ini, apa yang menjadi tantangannya? Nah, tantangannya yang pertama adalah perspektif itu tadi. Kenapa? Karena komunitas disabilitas itu ada persoalan terkait dengan stigma, diskriminasi, kemudian subordinasi, kemudian juga keberpihakan para pemangku kepentingan. Ini juga menjadi persoalan bagi gerakan advokasi untuk pemenuhan HAM disabilitas. Nah, kemudian yang kedua terkait dengan kebijakan, harmonisasi kebijakan, penganggaran, dan penegakan hukum. Sebenarnya kalau bangunan publik yang tidak aksesibel atau tidak bisa digunakan oleh masyarakat secara umum, baik itu anak-anak, perempuan, penyandang disabilitas, dan masyarakat rentan yang lainnya, itu di dalam undang-undang ada sanksi bahwa bangunan itu bisa dirobohkan. Tetapi selama ini penegakan hukum yang seperti ini sangat jarang sekali. Bahkan ketika terjadi kecelakaan di anak yang naik eskalator atau terjadi kecelakaan di lingkungan parkir yang tidak aksesibel kayak begitu, itu selalu yang disalahkan adalah penggunanya. Tidak pernah melihat atau mengevaluasi bagaimana sistem sarana dan prasarana, bagaimana sistem pembangunannya, itu aman dan nyaman atau tidak. Dan tidak ada punishment untuk hal ini. Termasuk juga ketika konstruksi sebuah bangunan jalan raya yang itu sangat memungkinkan sekali terjadinya resiko kecelakaan, dan ketika terjadi kecelakaan nggak pernah ada ini gugatan terkait dengan pembangunan yang seperti ini gitu. Selalu yang disalahkan adalah orangnya yang tidak hati-hati, tidak membaca rambu-rambu dan sebagainya. Kemudian yang ketiga tantangannya adalah pentingnya sinergi isu aksesibilitas dalam gerakan advokasi HAM dan masyarakat rentan. Nah, karena selama ini orang selalu melihatnya bahwa aksesibilitas, oh itu kebutuhannya disabilitas, anak-anak nggak penting, oh perempuan nggak penting, manula nggak penting, kemudian pedagang kaki lima nggak penting, kemudian yang lainnya tidak merasa memiliki kepentingan terkait dengan aksesibilitas itu. Padahal aksesibilitas ini adalah kepentingan semuanya. Nah, membangun kesadaran untuk menyadari pentingnya aksesibilitas. Nah, ini perlu dilakukan baik di stakeholder yang melakukan advokasi HAM maupun masyarakat rentan. Kemudian tantangan yang keempat adalah terkait dengan kekuatan untuk kampanye publik tentang aksesibilitas. Nah, ini sangat penting sekali, padahal sangat sedikit sekali orang yang melakukan kampanye terkait dengan aksesibilitas dalam layanan publik. Lebih banyak yang melakukan advokasi terkait dengan lebih tertarik pada isu-isu HAM yang lainnya, karena melihat isu aksesibilitas ini belum dilihat sebagai isu yang sangat penting. Kemudian tantangannya adalah aktor-aktor dan jaringan advokasi di lintas stakeholder. Ini menjadi tantangan tersendiri terkait dengan advokasi tentang aksesibilitas. Yang keenam, gerakan advokasi aksesibilitas publik itu masih terpotong-potong. Kalau kita lihat gerakan-gerakan advokasi ini masih, kalau melihat konteksnya Indonesia, ketika Makassar bergerak untuk aksesibilitas publik, melakukan monitoring dan sebagainya, tapi tiba-tiba di Jakarta isunya berbeda. Nah, dan belum ada gerakan untuk membangun isu bersama, bahwa aksesibilitas ini menjadi isu bersama yang akan menjadi tagline gerakan di semua wilayah. Nah, ini nih yang yang juga menjadi tantangan tersendiri begitu. Di samping gerakan advokasinya terpotong-potong, juga pemahaman terkait dengan aksesibilitas ini juga masih sangat dangkal. Karena ketika kawan-kawan disabilitas daksa misalkan, dia melakukan advokasi aksesibilitas, dia akan lebih melihat pada persoalan disabilitas daksa. Kalau teman-teman tunanetra yang melakukan advokasi, dia akan melihat kebutuhan tunanetra. Sementara kebutuhan aksesibilitas secara universal, yang itu bisa merangkul semua komunitas, baik perempuan, anak-anak, disabilitas dengan banyak varian, netra, intelektual, mental, ataupun yang yang bisu tuli dan sebagainya. Ini masih belum terbangun perspektif yang utuh terkait dengan masyarakat rentan dan kebutuhan aksesibilitasnya. Nah, kemudian yang ketujuh terkait dengan partisipasi masyarakat rentan dalam perencanaan, pelaksanaan pembangunan dan monitoring, evaluasi. Ini sangat terbatas sekali. Apalagi kebanyakan terkait dengan pelaksanaan pembangunan publik, entah jalan, entah gedung, kayak begitu, itu selalu diserahkan kepada lelang tender. Nah, kemudian hal inilah yang ketika sudah di tangan kontraktor dilempar di lelang, ini partisipasi masyarakat, kemudian dalam perencanaannya, dalam monefnya, dalam pelaksanaannya menjadi hilang. Sementara mekanisme kontrol terkait dengan pembangunan itu tidak ada. Nah, ini juga menjadi tantangan tersendiri bagi gerakan advokasi terkait dengan aksesibilitas. Nah,
Bu Ipung, mohon maaf, boleh
ya.
1 menit lagi Bu ya?
Oh iya, baik.
Ya, makasih Bu.
Nah, ya, terima kasih. Ini terkait dengan pengalaman. Ya, selama ini ketika kami melakukan advokasi, itu kami selalu membangun koalisi masyarakat sipil. Saya waktu mengadvokasi pembangunan Pasar Gede, Balai Kota, dan gedung DPRD Solo, kita membangun masyarakat peduli disabilitas. Dan ini isinya sangat beragam. Ada komunitas disabilitas, ada jadi komunitas ini akan diperhadapkan sebagai lawan. Pengemudi becak membutuhkan tempat untuk mangkal, sedangkan disabilitas butuh trotoar, pedagang kaki lima, dan sebagainya. Nah, ini ketika tidak membangun satu koalisi gerakan bersama, akan bisa bisa belah begitu ya. Nah, kemudian membangun gerakan perempuan dan anak di dalam perencanaan pembangunan, mulai dari muskel, musca, muskot. Kita memasukkan isu disabilitas, isu aksesibilitas sebagai kebutuhan bersama, baik di kawan-kawan yang bergerak untuk melakukan advokasi hak perempuan, advokasi hak anak, tentunya di dalam aspek layanan publik dan pembangunan. Nah, ini memasukkan isu disabilitas di sana. Jadi membangun sinergi isu. Nah, kemudian juga kami berusaha untuk tergabung dalam gerakan advokasi di peradilan inklusif. Kami membangun gerakan bersama melalui pokja-pokja. Kalau di pengadilan kami bekerja sama dengan Mahkamah Agung dalam pokja akses peradilan. Kemudian di Kejaksaan Agung kami juga masuk di dalam pokja untuk aksesibilitas di Kejaksaan Agung, kemudian di Kapolri kami juga tergabung di dalam pokja untuk aksesibilitas dalam proses sidik-lidik di kepolisian. Nah, inilah ketika tergabung di dalam pokja-pokja inilah kesempatan kami untuk melakukan capacity building, untuk membangun perspektif, untuk mendorong adanya implementasi terkait dengan aksesibilitas, kemudian untuk membangun membuka ruang-ruang konsultasi ketika mereka melakukan pembangunan terkait dengan gedung, lingkungan di lembaga-lembaga peradilan dan sebagainya. Nah, ini yang kita dorong ke sana. Jadi yang kita dorong itu di dalam pembangunannya, kemudian juga bagaimana membuat aspek-aspek dari aksesibilitas yang non fisik, bagaimana layanannya, bagaimana kebijakannya, kemudian bagaimana implementasinya, kemudian bagaimana membuat desain infrastrukturnya, itu yang yang kita lakukan. Nah, kami memaknai inklusi yang pertama I-nya adalah identifikasi. Jadi sangat penting sekali melakukan assessment. Apa ini kebutuhannya, apa konteksnya seperti apa. Kemudian N-nya adalah menaikkan kesadaran, membangun, melakukan capacity building, membangun perspektif terkait dengan masyarakat rentan, aksesibilitas dan lain sebagainya. Kemudian kembangkan akses dan kemandirian. Ini menjadi satu goalnya. Kemudian libatkan. Nah, ini partisipasi itu menjadi sangat penting. Kemudian arus utama, bagaimana agar isu aksesibilitas, isu masyarakat rentan ini menjadi topik utama, menjadi arus utama di dalam perencanaan yang dilakukan di masing-masing lembaga pemerintahan, terutama pengambil kebijakan. Kemudian S-nya adalah setara, membangun kesetaraan. Kemudian I-nya yang terakhir adalah ingat, perhatikan kebutuhan khusus individu. Karena berbicara aksesibilitas itu ada 3 hal. Yang pertama aksesibilitas fisik, seperti infrastruktur bangunan, jalan, trotoar, kemudian sarana transportasi, sarana dan prasarana yang lainnya. Kemudian aksesibilitas non-fisik, ini yang berhubungan terkait dengan informasi, layanan, sikap, perspektif, kebijakan, dan lain sebagainya. Kemudian terkait dengan reasonable akomodasi, kebutuhan-kebutuhan yang sangat-sangat spesifik yang dibutuhkan bagi kawan-kawan penyandang disabilitas. Tentunya keragaman disabilitas, kemudian keragaman latar belakang mereka itu akan sangat menentukan prioriti kebutuhannya akan seperti apa, bagaimana cara memenuhinya. Makanya salah satu yang kita tekankan di dalam aspek-aspek identifikasi disabilitas adalah profile assessment, bagaimana melihat disabilitasnya, seperti apa, kebutuhannya bagaimana, dan ini yang harus dipenuhi di dalam memberikan layanan yang aksesibel bagi penyandang disabilitas. Sampai di sini, terima kasih. Waktu saya kembalikan sama Pak Moderator.
Terima kasih Bu Ipung, terima kasih sudah berbagi, terutama kunci dalam advokasi. Saya rasa pengetahuan tersebut hanya bisa didapatkan bagi orang yang sudah berpengalaman mendampingi teman-teman di lapangan untuk memperjuangkan haknya. Dan juga yang terakhir itu singkatan dari inklusi itu sangat catchy, jadi seperti lebih mudah diingat Bu ya kalau dipakai singkatannya. Terima kasih sekali lagi Bu Ipung. With the spirit of participation in this Urban Social Forum, we want to open the time next for questions that are given by the participants. So let's, can the committee show the questions in Menti, or? Yeah, so there's a question: how can we push for information and communications accessibility for vulnerable groups, despite being possibly cheaper while also effective? It often comes second compared to physical development. So anyone want to volunteer to respond to this question? Maybe I'll choose. Lily, you want to start?
Sure, thank you. It's such a good question, and I don't know that I have a very clear answer. It is ironic that in the information and communication age that we are so focused on physical infrastructures. I think that from a political perspective, these are the most visible. These are the things where people cut ribbons, and get recognition for achievements. And so it's sadly not surprising. And it speaks to, I think, also where activism and advocacy could focus moving forward on information and communication. I think this forum, for example, is a really good example of, translation, live transcription, trying to create visual aids that are more accessible for people. So there are strong practices, probably more in civil society that could be mainstreamed within government, but not without the kind of conflict and pressure that we need to push forward changes. I'll pause there and make space for others.
Thank you, Lily. Maybe Nina, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, thank you, Aaron and Lily. I agree with Lily because, the most visible one is the physical infrastructures. But when we are talking about the informations and communications, most of people during nowadays will gonna think about digital accessibility as is, presence right now, because it's going to be easy to access and everything. But we are also have to consider that the elderly who doesn't have access to most information and communication systems is being considered in the decision-making process. The one thing that maybe we could do as individuals living in the society together with these elderly, that might be our parents, that might be us some days in the futures. So we have to build these communities, resilience towards this, sharing information and communication systems organically in the community, because it's just as simply as say hi to your neighbors, and then because you got the younger one usually get access to digital informations and communication, you could pass on the informations towards the elderly, because to our findings research in the COVID situations back then with the elderly and then also persons with disabilities, most of them doesn't know that the COVID is even exist. For recent situations, they don't know how to get on this social assistance. They don't know how to get vaccinated. So the systems has to be built even with the government. For example, this vaccines situations, like there is a layers in Indonesia, whereas the national government's mandates towards the provincial and city levels, and those the leaders in the neighborhood is accommodating their needs. So I think that's one of the possible alternative for the elderly that are being left behind for this information and communications issues. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Nina. So Anna and Bu Ipung, I'm going to choose another question if that's all right. So there's another one. Many think that inclusive participation in development.
Izin saya bisa menambahkan terkait dengan bagaimana memastikan informasi.
Oh, silakan Bu, silakan.
Ya, oke, baik, terima kasih. Nah, kalau kami mengenal istilah supported decision making. Jadi ini adalah pendampingan yang dilakukan untuk kawan-kawan penyandang disabilitas untuk mengambil keputusan. Nah, kemudian juga untuk bukan hanya mengambil keputusan, tetapi juga untuk mendampingi terkait dengan bagaimana akses informasi itu dia dapatkan. Akses informasi ini bukan hanya informasinya yang diperoleh, tetapi juga mereka memahami apa yang dimaksud dengan pesan yang disampaikan, terutama bagi kawan-kawan disabilitas yang terhambat, misalkan dia punya masalah terkait dengan mental, kemudian dia punya masalah terkait dengan intelektual. Nah, ini supported decision making ini sangat dibutuhkan. Apa saja yang bisa dilakukan oleh supported decision making ini? Yang pertama itu memantau informasi, kemudian menyederhanakan supaya informasi itu bisa dipahami, kemudian memberikan waktu untuk mendiskusikan terkait dengan pilihan-pilihannya. Dan di ruang diskusi ini tentunya ketika ada yang tidak paham itu perlu dijelaskan terlebih dahulu, perlu dibangun ini ya, rasa yang nyaman begitu. Kemudian juga untuk membuat apa yang kawan-kawan yang dengan disabilitas mental maupun yang intelektual ini bisa memberikan pilihannya, bisa menyampaikan pendapatnya. Nah, ini sangat-sangat penting sekali. Maka sebagai supported decision making itu sangat penting sekali membangun komunikasi yang setara, komunikasi yang humanis, yang bisa membangun trust antara kawan disabilitas dan timnya, begitu ya. Nah, ini kami cobakan di dalam melakukan pendampingan ketika kawan-kawan disabilitas yang berhadapan dengan hukum. Jadi akan ada 3 pendamping di sana. Satu adalah pendamping hukum. Tentunya ini yang akan memahami hukum, bagaimana proses hukum beracaranya dan sebagainya. Kemudian pendamping disabilitasnya, ini untuk mengetahui bagaimana berinteraksi, bagaimana berkomunikasi dan lain sebagainya. Yang ketiga itu adalah ahli. Nah, ini pengalaman kami menggunakan supported decision making, ini sangat-sangat membantu bagi kawan-kawan disabilitas untuk dia bisa menyampaikan apa pendapatnya, bisa mengetahui, memahami informasinya, perkembangan misalkan kalau dalam konteks hukum ya proses hukumnya seperti apa, sampai pada memahami apa ini langkah-langkah apa yang harus dia lakukan. Nah, ini pendampingan ini sangat-sangat penting sekali. Dan memang pada prakteknya menurut UNGRPD supported decision making ini ada 3 tahap. Yang pertama itu terkait dengan kebutuhan sehari-hari, pendampingan untuk kehidupan sehari-hari. Yang kedua untuk memutuskan hal yang penting, tinggal di mana, bekerja di mana, kemudian mau memilih sekolah di mana, seperti itu. Kemudian yang ketiga terkait dengan perkara rumit, ketika dia berhadapan dengan hukum, ketika dia akan berhadapan pada misalkan kontrak jual beli dan sebagainya, atau pembagian waris, atau membuat wasiat dan lain sebagainya. Nah, ini sangat-sangat penting sekali di dalam 3 ranah ini, kawan-kawan disabilitas, terutama yang terkendala untuk komunikasi, ini sangat penting sekali mendapatkan pendampingan supported decision making. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Bu Ipung untuk responsnya. Mungkin maybe the next question I would like to ask Anna and Bu Ipung also. So someone asked, many think that inclusive participation in development takes too long in comparison to the urgent development demand. How do we change the perception of the government on that matter? Anna, you wanna?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you for this question. Yeah, I agree that there's a perception that it's taking too long or it's getting too complex. But what we've recently done when we've been doing kind of Streets for Kids projects around like making school streets safer and reclaiming space is using like very simple tools like photography, like getting children outside on the streets and photographing what they like and what they dislike in their built environment, and then presenting it to the stakeholders, to the municipality and the mayor. And it was a very effective tool, first of all, to explain that actually kids want the same things. They actually sometimes are even more cute on like saying we want safe streets, we want more nature. I think it's more kind of not being afraid of doing that and kind of not overthinking it and like not creating a very complex process that's like hard to enter, that's not transparent, and being very explicit about like how you're engaging the participants and why, and like what you can promise and what you cannot. Just being really honest that, you know, if you know the project can be completed and you have funding, like to say it, and if it's still like can be revoked, just being very like not trying to sugarcoat that all of this kind of like complex issues, because then it does help. But then it just takes a lot of time. And from what I've seen in my work with different cities is the government leadership is really important. And if some of the leadership has like public health background or understands some of these issues, even like some of the aspects, usually they care about more and like more diverse and different groups. So I think all of us should kind of inspire ourselves and our friends and more people to consider like being in the government and governing and changing the systems and not relying on someone else to come and do it. Because when it comes from a different side and kind of like from more business oriented, then we get cities that are kind of only good for consumption.
Thank you, Anna. Bu Ipung mau merespons juga, Bu? Halo, Bu Ipung.
Ya, baik. Kami punya pengalaman yang menarik saat mendampingi masyarakat, forum masyarakat basis dalam pembangunan trotoar di Jalan Slamet Riyadi. Di situ kami diperhadapkan pada satu konflik dengan komunitas disabilitas, dengan pedagang kaki lima, kemudian dengan tukang parkir, kemudian ada kayak pedagang asongan. Nah, kemudian waktu itu kami meminta pemerintah untuk memfasilitasi. Kami duduk bersama untuk memfasilitasi kebutuhan masing-masing. Ruang trotoar yang seperti apa di jalan raya itu. Nah, ternyata hasilnya di luar dugaan. Justru ketika perspektif ini dibangun, kebutuhan masing-masing, ada forum dialog antara masyarakat basis ini, dan mereka bisa mempertimbangkan, oh iya, ada yang butuh guiding block, ada yang butuh ramp, ada yang butuh handrail. Kalau seperti itu, nanti penataannya akan seperti apa. Dan mereka bisa membuat rancangan desain, walaupun tidak sebagus rancangan arsitektur, tetapi mereka sudah bisa menata. Kalau seperti itu, ini wilayah yang dipakai untuk pedagang kaki lima dengan desain tenda begini, angkringannya sekian, ruangannya sekian gitu. Ini areal untuk jalan kaki. Nah, ini areal sekian, kemudian guiding block ditata di mana, kemudian tempat parkir itu akan berada di posisi di mana. Mereka membuat sketsa itu. Nah, ini kemudian yang diadopsi oleh perizinan tata ruang yang humanis, ya, yang memberi ruang untuk pedagang kaki, yang memberi ruang untuk persekentaan di antara komunitas basis ini bisa bisa diminimalisir. Sebenarnya bukan berapa lamanya proses yang dibutuhkan, tetapi adalah berapa atau strateginya seperti apa ketika pemerintah kemudian menjembatani perbedaan perspektif di antara masyarakat ini, dan kemudian juga bagaimana agar pemerintah ini mau mendengarkan apa yang mereka inginkan, kebutuhannya seperti apa. Kemudian pemerintah yang menjembatani untuk membingkai kebutuhan dan partisipasi mereka ini kemudian dirumuskan di dalam sebuah formasi kebijakan atau formasi perencanaan pembangunan yang lebih terstruktur. Nah, ini cara ini pernah kami cobakan ketika terjadi persoalan. Nah, sebenarnya partisipasi masyarakat kan. Nah, sebenarnya ketika mulai dibuka ruang-ruang partisipasi ini, kemudian masyarakat terfasilitasi untuk menyampaikan pendapatnya, untuk menyampaikan gagasannya, memberikan masukan itu akan lebih akan lebih membangun hubungan yang harmonis begitu. Dan pengalaman kami ketika melakukan, kami berbagi peran. Dan itu yang membuat desainnya, membuat market terkait dengan pasar gede yang aksesibel. Kemudian untuk masing-masing kawan-kawan disabilitas ini melakukan pemetaan. Sebenarnya kebutuhan aksesibilitasnya, misalkan toilet aksesibel, tangga yang aksesibel, pemasangan guiding block, handrail, ramp dan sebagainya. Kemudian, nah ini didiskusikan area pintu masuk, area pintu keluar dan sebagainya. Kemudian pedagang juga begitu. Berapa besar ruangan yang dia butuhkan untuk perdagangan dan sebagainya. Nah, sebenarnya kalau ruang-ruang partisipasi itu diciptakan, jadi hambatan yang tadi itu waktunya butuh lama, repot dan sebagainya, itu bisa dihilangkan karena masyarakat juga sudah sangat cerdas untuk bagaimana mereka bisa berpartisipasi dalam perencanaan pembangunan. Begitu, terima kasih.
Makasih Ibu Ipung. So we still have time for one more question, so I'll read out the most voted question. So I will ask speakers to maybe, if possible, response very briefly, since we're very short on time. So the question is, the challenge of inclusive concept within transportation or roads are balancing between transportation needs and how to develop inclusiveness within. How is your opinion about this conflict of needs? Maybe Nina, you want to start?
Thank you, Aaron. So from my perspective, that if the inclusivity is seen as a value, that shouldn't be any conflict, because like when we try to build something inclusive transportations, the investment is not only for disabled people, it's not only for elderly or pregnant women, it's all for us, because investment in this inclusive infrastructures is investment for everyone, because someday we're gonna use it anyway. And then you couldn't predict if you are going to have accident or not, but the wheelchair users, for example, is not only for disabled people, it's also for the sick people, it's also for those who are in needs. And then to access these transportations, for example, using the wheelchair user, we should make it at the first beginning, because it should cut the budget, if we included this inclusivity as a values in the beginning, rather than you upgrading that later, you're gonna waste more money than budget on that. So I think my perspective is that inclusivity should be seen as a value that embedded in every aspect of life. So investment in infrastructure is investment for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Anna, you want to respond?
Yeah, I agree with Nina. I also think that it's not necessarily conflict. It's more that we don't have the priorities set up right. And also I feel like there's still this kind of thinking that we still have time to fix it later, or, you know, like it's going to be fine. We can still continue building the roads for cars and prioritize traffic. But we all know we are in a global health crisis, not only because of the COVID pandemic, but because of the air pollution, lack of physical activity. So it's like we really don't have any time to kind of undo this damage. And I think Lily showed a very good example at the very beginning. We just really need to kind of mobilize forces to shift that old thinking of the infrastructure. And it's not a conflict. We need it for everyone. We need it for the future, for, you know, all the future generations, because we have limited resources on this planet. So we cannot just waste them by, you know, like rebuilding and tearing down all this stuff.
Thank you, Anna. I'll go with Bu Purwanti first, maybe. Bu Ipung.
Ya, terima kasih. Saya sangat sependapat dengan dua narasumber terkait dengan kota inklusi itu ya bukan hanya menjawab kebutuhan manula atau menjawab kebutuhan disabilitas, tetapi kota inklusi itu untuk semuanya tanpa terkecuali. Karena di sini mensyaratkan, mengupayakan penyediaan kemudahan berupa infrastruktur, bantuan, layanan, dan sarana prasarana, sehingga semuanya bisa bisa terpenuhi kebutuhannya dan mendapatkan haknya. Nah, ini yang perlu kita garis bawahi, begitu ya. Kemudian ketika kita membangun sebuah bangunan yang aksesibel, itu sebenarnya bukan hanya menjawab kebutuhan dari penyandang disabilitas saja, tetapi juga akan meminimalkan resiko terjadinya kecelakaan atau terjadinya cedera. Misalkan nih tangga yang tidak ada handrailnya dengan tangga yang ada handrailnya. Nah, ini kan orang ketika naik tangga itu bisa berpegangan handrail sehingga dia terhindar dari resiko terpeleset atau jatuh karena dia punya pegangan, begitu ya. Nah, jadi kota inklusi itu spiritnya, ruhnya adalah universal design. Bagaimana setiap bangunan, infrastruktur yang ada, layanan yang ada bisa diakses oleh semuanya dan ramah untuk semuanya.
Terima kasih, Bu Ipung. Lily?
I'll be happy to jump in there if that's okay.
Yeah.
So something, and I really appreciate these responses so far and really agree. Something I want to highlight is that often when we're advocating for inclusion or equity or multimodal transit investments, we're sort of the enemy is, or what we're presented with is this either or thinking. It's like, oh, we need development, or if you want development, you can't have participation. Or if you want transport infrastructure now, which we need, then you can't have all this multimodal sort of investment and engagement. And that it's a trap, and we have to really think past it. The other thing I want to say is we have to be careful when what is meant by needs. So whenever there's, we talk about development needs or, mobility needs, the needs that are often actually being represented are the needs of motorists, or the needs of developers, the needs of middle class and affluent people. So, just being like really critical about what exactly is meant. And then the third thing I want to say is, I think we fall into this trap of thinking about individualism and like zero sum. So it's like, okay, if we don't put money into roads, then there's going to be all this traffic. And so I have a car or I have a motorcycle, so I'm going to oppose these other investments in bike lanes and things. But in fact, we exist in societies in mutual relationships. So the more there is investment in multimodal transportation options, the more accessible these infrastructures are, the lesser of a load on the road for motorists, the less, so it's all sort of distributed, and the less people travel and they're able to meet their needs locally, get amenities and services, the less travel as well. And so just thinking of how we fit into a bigger picture, I think is really important.
Thank you, Lily. So thank you so much, everyone. So I'll try to conclude the session. So the right to the city is a collective right for all people who inhabit, access, and use the city. So it entails not only the right to use what already exists in urban spaces, but also define and create what should exist. When marginalized people choose, they choose better, they choose what works for them. So instead of choosing what's right for the marginalized, let's acknowledge and empower their choices. So I think this is what all presenters have been doing, either through production of data, co-design work, advocacy work, because I think that's how we create an inclusive city for everyone for tomorrow. So thank you so much for all four wonderful speakers in the session. Thank you, Lily, Anna, Nina, and Bu Ipung. We hope tonight's session brought some ideas and optimism for everyone that creating another city is possible. Thank you. Over to you, Namira.
All right, thank you so much, Aaron, Lily, Nina, Anna, and Bu Ipung. Such an eye-opening discussion today on how to make our city more inclusive for everyone. So to finally really conclude our session, we invite everyone again to use our gadgets and open our Menti for to check our first polling. Right, so the question reads, in 1 to 3 words, what does an inclusive city mean to you? And here we have kota untuk semua, city for all, friendly for everyone, liberalis, wow, that's interesting, solidarity, kota yang berkeadilan, a just city is mendengar semua orang, listening to everyone, accessible, secure, healthy, no one left behind. Right. So thank you everyone for participating, and we have one last question to close our discussion. Our closing question. Right. In 1 to 3 words, what do we need to make our cities more inclusive? Community participation, great. Stakeholder collaboration. Mm-hmm. Raising awareness, stakeholder collaboration, behavioral changes. Listen and learn, respect human rights. Kesadaran bermasyarakat. All right. Advocacy, access to information. All right, I guess that concludes our session tonight. Before we, so I would like to remind everyone that there's still 1 day left of the Urban Social Forum. So tomorrow we'll have a discussion about a foodie city, about the thing on our plates every day and where do they come from and how do they affect our daily life in cities and beyond. Joining us tomorrow will be Yves Kaban, Emeritus Professor in Development Planning UCL, Gustinur Asia Shabia from Tian Indonesia, and Nayaka Angger from kota-kota. And our moderator would be Reza Ramadan, an agricultural practitioner. Lastly, let's take our photo. Let's take a photo. So if everyone can open their camera and smile, look pretty for the picture.